Hello, and welcome to the J of Metro Detroit's 71st Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Brenda Brook, and I'm a longtime member and past chair of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair Steering Committee. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to Lost and Found with Kathryn Schulz. We are celebrating over 70 years of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair and a return to more traditional book fair events in person at the J. To see our full event schedule, watch events you may have missed, and browse our online store, please visit our website at jccdet.org/bookfair. And if you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to Book Fair. And you can do that at our website as well, jccdet.org/bookfair. We rely on community support to make this annual event possible. So thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. The Book Fair team would like to thank our day sponsors, Joe Ellen and George Nyman, co-sponsors Sandy and Steve Matz, and Tama, Budai, and Rab PC. And I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the whole Book Fair committee. Your dedication, innovation, commitment, and hard work make all of this possible. We have a fascinating event for you today, and we want you to be a part of it. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comment section below, or by texting to the number in the corner of your screen. Our speakers have a great discussion prepared, and they'll take as many of your questions as they can. And while you're here at our new YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the reminder bell. That way you'll never miss any of our exciting virtual events. The focus of today's event is Lost and Found with author Kathryn Schulz. We also have with us Rabbi Joseph Krakoff, CEO and Senior Director of the Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network. Kathryn Schulz is a staff member at The New Yorker and the author of Being Wrong. She won a National Magazine Award and a Pulitzer Prize for The Really Big One, her article about seismic risk in the Pacific Northwest. Lost and Found grew out of Losing Streak, a New York story that was anthologized in the Best American Essays. Her work has also appeared in the Best American Science and Nature Writing, the Best American Travel Writing, and the Best American Food Writing. A native of Ohio, she lives with her family on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Rabbi Joseph Krakoff is the Senior Director of the Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network. He's also the author with Dr. Michelle Sider of Never Long Enough, Finding Comfort and Hope Amidst Grief and Loss. Please join me in welcoming Kathryn Schulz and Rabbi Joseph Krakoff.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. And Kathryn, it is really, really wonderful to get to talk to you after reading your absolutely inspiring and truly thoughtful book. I do want to mention that today's Veterans Day, and I, of course, am thinking of the veterans of U.S. Armed Forces and thank them for their service. So growing up as a youngster in Shaker Heights, Ohio, did you know that one day this is who you wanted to be? This is what you wanted to do? How did that sort of trajectory work for you?
I kind of did know, is the truth. I'm one of these extraordinarily lucky people who got to do with my life what I always dreamed of doing. And I'm thankful for that every day. That suggests a little more foresight and clarity than was actually at work. So I guess the broad thing that's true is I always knew I wanted to write. I can't remember a time when that wasn't true. I was an absolute little bookworm and highly indulged in that particular habit by my parents and also by really phenomenal public schools and public libraries and their librarians. And so I felt like I had a path in a kind of surprisingly stark way early on. Like I can't say that I ever considered doing anything else, but I think if you had talked to me when I was 9 or 10 or even 20, I think I probably would have told you I wanted to write fiction. Certainly as a kid, as a kid, like who writes nonfiction, right? Like all there are is stories basically. And I was very much enthralled to them and it seemed exciting to try to write them. And that desire kind of persisted clean through to my early 20s when it became extremely apparent to me that I'm just honestly terrible at it. Like I don't I don't have that gear at all. I wish that I did, and I admire people who do. So being unable to do that, and kind of coming of age and recognizing the other ways you can tell stories and the other ways you can have fun with words and language and ideas, I turned my attention to nonfiction. So yes, I can't say that, there was some great alternate existence where I was like almost an astronaut or something. I was just, it was quite foreordained that I was going to do what I'm doing.
That's excellent. Well, what was the first thing you wrote that got published? And sort of go back in your mind to what that experience was like, of something that you produced that came out of your mind that turned out in print that people got to see and read.
That is such a fascinating question, and I have to congratulate you, Rabbi, because I do quite a lot of these, and I can't say that anyone has ever asked me. I guess if I really reach back, published is kind of a strange category and easily interpreted in different ways. So I'm going to give the earliest possible answer. When I was in elementary school, as discussed, I was a real little bookworm, which is a very kind way of saying just like an absolutely hopeless, unreconstructed nerd, not popular among my classmates, mercifully kind of tended to by a series of teachers who I'm sure just shook their heads and thought I was hopeless. But anyway, at that age, I was really enthralled to T.H. White, the guy who wrote The Once and Future King, The Sword and the Stone, this incredible epic story about King Arthur. And I went deep into the kind of medieval fantasy world. And so when in 5th grade, we were studying the elements of a story, plot and character and dialogue, and we were given the homework assignment to, having studied all that, to write one of our own. I think most kids went home and very sanely, filled out, one wide ruled piece of paper, front and back, and maybe just front, and called it a day. I wrote a probably all told 450-page trilogy.
Wow.
Wow. Actually, I think that particular teacher was only subjected to the first volume of that trilogy. It's appallingly bad. I had the unfortunate experience of coming across it recently. It's just terrible and derivative in all the ways you might imagine, but I sure loved writing it. And my teacher, with incredible kindness, helped sort of usher it into being as a little bound book as part of this wonderful thing that happened in Ohio and probably Michigan too, called the Young Authors Conference. All of which is a long way of saying that I had the great good fortune at that of meeting an actually published author, Beverly Cleary, the late great Beverly Cleary, which was utterly formative to me. Because it was kind of the first moment when I realized that authors were living people, like not just Shakespeare and all of the great dead, that this was something you could actually do for a living. So in a very roundabout way, and I'm not sure that answers your question adequately, that was the first thing I ever published. If you want a more respectable answer, tell me and I'll keep on going.
No, that's a great answer. And I certainly want to get to your brilliant book, but I'm just fascinated by sort of like what got you to this point. So I have just 2 more questions in this realm, and then we'll jump into your book. What are your favorite subjects to write about?
What an interesting question. So I love the natural world. I love it personally. I find it restorative and beautiful, and I find that it connects me with the kind of deep and sweeping questions of existence that I care about. I don't know how anyone can go outside and not kind of marvel at existence and also have a lot of questions about it. Yeah. So I love to write about it in all ways, both to tend that kind of inner response to it, but also because I love science. So much of the natural world is beautifully described for us by science. It's not the only way. The poets do an incredible job too. But I really like science writing, partly, to be honest, because scientists are wonderful sources. I'm so not cut out for like political writing. I don't have what it takes to deal with people who are either really combative or want you to tell a version of the story that is not the version you want to tell, or whatever it may be. Scientists are just so wonderful. They just literally want to teach you what they know, and they will spend hours and hours doing it to make sure you get it right. So it's also a kind of lazy, fearful move on my part, but I do genuinely like it. But I think the thing I love most about my job is actually the permission to kind of write about anything. I was initially hired at the New Yorker as a book critic, and it's wonderful to write about books and delightful. And of course, writing about books is shorthand for saying I get to write about anything, because books are about all kinds of things. So, I would more say there are a handful of things I don't love writing about. I seldom write about politics. I would be hopelessly ill-suited to writing about finance or economics, or sadly sports, although I think sports are really fun to write about. But beyond those things, I have a very wide range, which is to say I am a professional dilettante, and it's a ton of fun.
Awesome. That's great. So one more question and we'll get into the book. 2016, you are awarded the Pulitzer for feature writing. What was that like? I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's an incredible, incredible honor.
Yes, I will not underplay it for you, Rabbi. It was honestly quite incredible. And since we're about to discuss a book that is in significant part about the death of my father, I will tell you in all honesty, the single greatest thing about winning the Pulitzer is that, in fact, it happened while my dad was still alive, because the it's a close call whether this was the best thing or the second best thing, but let's go ahead and be honest and say the best thing was sitting there in my house. I was actually working. I was on deadline for another story. It was a Sunday evening, and my cell phone rang, and I picked it up, and it said, David Remnick. And, David Remnick is a wonderful Menschy guy. This is the editor-in-chief of the New Yorker, but he doesn't make a habit of calling his staff writers. And so when it's Sunday night and you're a little behind on a piece and on deadline, your first thought is not this is good news, your first thought is this is strange. Do they need to crash this piece or something? So I answer my phone, and in fact, he's calling to share this news with me. I guess that was probably the best phone call, but by a very close margin, the second best phone call was turning around and calling my parents and telling them, because I really do feel like all of the gratitude and frankly, as a new parent myself, all of the hard work of getting someone to the place where such a thing would happen is mainly to their credit. So, but yeah, it was incredibly amazing, and I plan to rest on that laurel for the rest of my life. So don't expect any more.
No, that's okay. That's all right. And I want to talk about your dad of blessed memory in a few minutes, because I really got the sense that he was really just a remarkable, wonderful human being. So this book started out, as I understand, as kind of an article that evolved. Talk about that process. When you wrote that article, did you ever think, oh, this has the capacity to be a book? Was that the intent originally, or did that sort of come about based on people's reactions or based on the process that you went through in writing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It did not. I had no intention at all of turning that article into a book. So, yes, the very first thing I ever wrote about my father's death was an essay for the New Yorker that was this honestly kind of strange little elegy for him. Strange in that it was of course about his death and my love for him and grief over him, but that piece of it was embedded in this broader exploration of the idea of loss. This question of why would I put my beloved dead father in the same category as, my missing iPhone, or the sock that just, goes into the washing machine and somehow never comes out. Is that linguistic coincidence? Are these things meaningfully related in some way? And that was a question that had interested me for a really long time. And after my dad died, it kind of found its gravitas and its importance. And so I wrote about it. And no, to be honest, when I finished that essay, I felt very done. I was so grateful to have something to say and to have a place willing to publish it. And I felt like I had kind of done what I needed to do for my dad and for me and my memories of my dad. And it didn't cross my mind that I would turn it into a book. But of course, you're not wrong to think that when you publish almost anything, there is someone who thinks you should turn it into a book. Word to the wise, would-be authors out there, you mostly should not turn it into a book. A lot of really excellent article length things are excellent because they are article length. Not altogether that many things really merit the kind of duration of a book. But anyway, so a couple people, including an editor I really trusted, said, "Are you sure you don't want to turn this into a book?" No, I don't want to turn this into a book. And what happened was a bunch of time went by, and it's so funny. I was in the car with my now wife, then girlfriend, driving in the absolute middle of nowhere on a back road in Alabama. It was probably about 2 a.m. My partner, this sounds stranger than it is. My partner is also a writer. She, at the time, was working on a nonfiction book set in the great state of Alabama. We spent a lot of time in the car at 2 a.m. on back roads in Alabama. But there we were. And I guess something had just happened. Like maybe someone else had just said, "Oh, you sure you want to turn that article into a book?" And I was kind of explaining why not. Like it felt a little too, I didn't want to just write another grief memoir. Grief is incredibly important, obviously. There's always more things to be said about it. But I just didn't, I didn't want to spend 3 years of my life just thinking about grief. There was certainly more to be said about my dad, and my dad was amazing, but I couldn't quite justify like just a biography of my father. He was, I personally think he was incredible, but he wasn't, Sam Adams waiting for Stacy Schiff to write a new, 700-page biography of him. So I thought, well, no, I don't. It's just kind of not quite enough to grab me there, which means I don't think there's enough to grab readers. And then, so I was explaining all this, and kind of as I was talking, it dawned on me that actually there was sort of a perfect mirror image piece to be written, which was about the equally weird category of finding things, right? Like discovery is as strange and capacious as loss, right? Because we find, if we're lucky, that missing iPhone and that sock that vanished in the washing machine. But, we also find our faith, and we find meaning, and we find a vaccine for a global pandemic. And this was the piece that clicked it into place for me. We find love if we're lucky, right? And so what I realized was, actually, there's the mirror image explores that category, but the emotional heart of it, as a kind of complement to the death of my father, is my story of finding love. That was like interesting to me. It wasn't like, commit to this book level interesting. It was suddenly got kind of interesting. And my partner, in sort of reflecting back to me what I was talking about, used this like totally everyday phrase, lost and found. And the mind on an Alabama back road at 2 a.m. is a very strange thing, because I swear, as I sit here, she said it, and all I heard was the "and." We had been talking about loss and my dad, and we had been talking about discovery and falling in love, and she said lost and found, and right away I was like, that's the book. That's the book. Because what's actually interesting, right, is like, it's not just that we fall in love or just that we grieve someone. It's that we fall in love and we grieve. And in fact, we only grieve because we have loved someone. And the terms of falling in love are like, you are going to lose this person because we are going to lose everything, right? And that kind of conjunction is really interesting to me. And it's not just grief and love, right? Like life is utterly full of these kind of complicated ands. You like can't stand your ex-husband and you adore the children you wouldn't have if you hadn't married him. Like these kinds of things are just, they're so omnipresent in life. I do not have an ex-husband, to be clear, but everyone has some version of this kind of story. So that was the moment where I was like, oh, actually, that's now this is a book I want to write.
That's incredible. I have to tell you, I can't tell you enough how moved and inspired I was by your book. And I've recommended it to so many people already that they should get it and read it, because it has so much wisdom in it. And it is so relatable and so real and so authentic to the human condition. And I have to tell you, I love the way you structured it such that you kind of bring us in, that you bring us in by with stats like, which are staggering, right? That we spend 6 solid months looking for missing objects, which I love, that translate, you say to 54 million hours spent searching per day, and $30 billion a year in particular on lost cell phones. I just thought, like, I just feel like you peppered it with really drawing me in and wanting to hear more and read more, and how you go from the idea of the truth about losing things and our place in the cosmos and feeling so small. I just thought it was really, really amazing, in which you kind of like just took a concept and drew it out. And then as you evolved into sort of, well, what does it mean to, right, kind of have a new identity and lose your former identity when you move? And you talked about your father arriving in New York Harbor. I just thought that it was really amazing that lost and found is something that every single day we can look to things in our own lives that we lose and that we find. And it just resonates so deeply. I know that wasn't really a question, but I think what you did here is beyond words.
It's very, very kind of you. I mean, you never know kind of what readers a book is going to find, or if it's going to find them. And I'm grateful that you liked it, and kind of liked it at every level. I mean, for me, it's so funny you talk about these numbers of hours spent losing things or whatever. For me, I think a lot of the liberation of this book, when I did kind of land on the idea, was that actually it's not straight memoir in any normal sense, right? Like there's a reason there's a whole bunch of facts in it. And there's facts about everything from, right, how many objects do we lose on average a day or a year, to, where do meteorites come from, and how often do they strike the earth, and what are the odds of finding them, and facts of, of the kind of formation of the planet itself. And that really was a lot of the fun for me, was feeling like, well, my story is actually, I mean, unto me, this is, I think, true for all of us. Unto me, my story is unbelievably interesting, right, and worthy. But of course, in the grand scheme of things, my story is incredibly banal, right? I'm not Michelle Obama. Like, I'm not going to write a memoir about marrying the man who's going to become the president of the free world. I'm not, Tara Westover, who grew up in this like exceptionally unusual family, extremist Mormon family, and went on to get the superlative education and write educated. Like, I didn't have a memoir of the extraordinary in me. But to me, that kind of banality of like, we all lose people we love and grieve. If we're lucky, we all find love. Like, to me, that was the whole interesting thing. But what made it writable was the way that I could explore these broader categories and bring in these kinds of facts and ideas, and kind of untether it a little bit from my life, and hopefully kind of latch it onto your life and to everyone's life as well.
Well, it worked very well.
That's very kind of you.
I want to ask some of the concepts in your book. I want to sort of dig in right now, if that's okay. You say that most people learn to count their blessings after exposure to serious loss. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think it requires serious loss for people to actually recognize how lucky, how blessed they are?
It's such a good question, because obviously it should be otherwise, and I think the other circumstance under which we're good at this is very, very close proximity to serious loss. I think most of us take a moment and count our blessings when, something happens to our neighbor's child, not our own, or something happens, we hit a patch of black ice and do a 360 on the highway, and we're totally unscathed on the other side. In these moments where we are reminded of the incredible fragility of everything we love, we I think also are good at counting our blessings. That's why so many of us did a lot of blessing counting during the pandemic. I think we were always proximate to a lot of loss, and I think reminded to be thankful if we were lucky enough to not sustain the worst of those blows. But I don't know. I mean, Rabbi, you tell me. This is kind of this is exactly what I would put to a rabbi. Why are we not able to cherish life and feel grateful for all the things that we have without the little prod of loss around us? I would love to liberate us from loss and still assume a posture of profound gratitude for what we have, but we're so bad at it. I think I guess one thing I would say, since I am talking to a rabbi, is I think it's a really good argument for traditions and for holidays. I think that we are headed right now into a secular holiday, right into Thanksgiving, and I think it's fabulous we set aside a day for gratitude, right? We should set aside some of every day for gratitude. And I think many other holidays, both secular and religious, throughout the year, ideally play that kind of function. But it is strange how we need some kind of external force. We don't do it automatically very often, I don't think.
No, I agree with you. It's something I think probably most of us could work on, is how do we find a place for gratitude every single day. I mean, it's a humbling thing to do, to find a place for gratitude and to feel blessed to, have what we have. And it's interesting. I think of so many Jewish teachings that I teach from time to time, in terms of the idea of being satisfied with who we are and our lot in life, and not looking, somebody's always going to have more, somebody's always going to have less. And how do we get to a sense of peace, before we're sort of threatened with serious loss or something bad happening? And we all have things to work on. I think as a society, there's a lot. If there was more gratitude, the world would be a much happier, much more joyful and place than it is. Let's talk a little bit about dementia, because I know this is rampant in our society today, and the statistics are also staggering in terms of how much dementia there'll be in the world in the next 10, 15, 20 years as people are living longer. And the idea of the brain, as you talked about, it being the deepest and most mysterious of all the valleys of lost things. Sometimes dementia, in a strange way, is a gift to the person that has it. When they have a loss, they don't know that they lost their loved one, and so they're not, maybe feeling the pain that they would feel otherwise. But to other people, it's not really a gift. It's the opposite of that. To see somebody, as you said, forget the town they live in, forget the name of their spouse, forget what to do with a hairbrush, et cetera, et cetera. It is something I think we all struggle with. And there's really almost no family today that's unscathed by some connection to somebody who has some form of memory loss or dementia. How did you sort of deal with that experience as it evolved?
Well, I should say, for those listening who haven't read the book, which I assume is the majority of listeners, my family had an extremely anomalous experience of dementia. I say extremely. Actually, a question I'm professionally interested in is, how anomalous was it? The nutshell version of what happened is, my father, about 10 years before he died, started to show classic signs of cognitive impairment and serious memory loss. And this was happening in the context of various similarly alarming physical problems. My dad had, to his dying day, undiagnosed and apparently undiagnosable autoimmune disorder that was just wildly disruptive to his health in incredibly unpredictable and frightening ways. So it was like, playing whack-a-mole, basically. Every time the doctors were trying to sort out, they couldn't figure out the underlying problem, so they were always treating the kind of immediate manifestation and trying to manage the symptoms. It was all very scary. But at some point during the course of this, my dad, bluntly put, also started to lose his mind. And physical suffering is horrible. It's horrible to witness. It's horrible to experience. But I am inclined to think that the people who will tell you that cognitive decline is the hardest thing to witness are probably right. I certainly found it the hardest. Now, it didn't help that my father was a man defined almost entirely by his intellect. He had a truly towering one and a really joyful one. And it was kind of how he presented in the world. And it was certainly alongside just this wonderful, truly unconditional love. It was how he related to my sister and me and to my mom. So it was incredibly painful to watch. The kind of punchline of the story is that it turned out, after many years of witnessing this and living with it, and frankly making a very emotional peace with the fact that my dad was just gone. It turned out that actually, in our case, my father's dementia was caused by the combination of prescription medications that he was on.
Wow.
And we pulled him off of them. And in the most, talk about gratitude, in truly the most stunning thing I have ever witnessed in my entire adult life, in the space of 1 week, we went from, as I said, I think all of us had kind of mourned the man we'd known and resigned ourselves long since to never seeing him again. And in the space of a week, he was back, and he was back 100%. It
Wow.
was incredible. It's what everyone wishes for and hopes for. So we had a really unusual trajectory for it, and a very forgiving one, right? I got what everyone wants. I got my dad back. I got my loved one back. But I can say, I'm from the years, handful of years of his decline, his cognitive decline. I have no wisdom on this front, except to say that there is no amount of patience that is too much patience, and no amount of kindness that is too much kindness for others going through this, for yourself if you're going through it, for the person who's experiencing it. Although you're right to note that sometimes they're insulated from its worst effects. My father certainly was. He was kind of pleasantly oblivious to the whole thing. But that's not always the case, I know. Right. And a lot of people live with the fear of cognitive decline or the actuality of it. So I don't know. I mean, it certainly was among these kinds of loss that I write about. I think that it's up there on the end of the truly most painful ones to reckon with.
It's interesting. I work in hospice care. I was a congregational rabbi for 16 years. In the last 9 years, I've been a hospice rabbi. And, I think hospice is very much misunderstood. So often in hospice, the doctors take people off different medications that actually conflict with one another. And you almost, like you just said, like with your dad, you kind of, for a period of time, you get back the person that they were before. And again, not in every situation, there's no every, but I see it over and over again. And it's interesting with doctors in particular. Doctors are taught to be curative. Doctors are taught to heal. And doctors don't want to tell a person, when death is, when the end is near. And so we struggle with people all the time in terms of understanding hospice, or they call it the evil H word. But you speak about it and not what you just said, but also in your book, right? There was no more wires. There were no more machines. That it was comforting to be with your dad, to sit by his side, to hold his hands. And what you said, which struck me so deeply in the work that I do, is that it was bearably sad, not unbearably. Could you just briefly sort of give us some insight into that experience? Because part of what I've devoted my career to is helping people understand that hospice is a gift when the person is ready, obviously at the appropriate time. And sometimes people wait too late when there's so much more that could be done to help the person.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start, Rabbi, by thanking you for the work you do. I think it is probably the most salt of the earth, generous, important, kind work on this planet. And I have nothing but respect and gratitude for every hospice care worker we ever encountered. They were wonderful to a person. I agree. I think that it's a gift, and I agree it is often arrived at a little too late. And I think that, look, I'm equally grateful to doctors and medicine. I have enormous respect for it. For a very long time, the miracles of modern medicine in the hands of some very, very talented doctors saved my father's life, saved it serially. My father probably would have been dead at 62, if not, frankly, at 45, had it not been for a number of really impressive medical interventions. The same is true of my father-in-law. The same is true, heaven spare us, of my little niece, who was born gravely premature and is now absolutely thriving and a teenager. So I have, all of which is just to say, I have nothing in the world but respect for doctors. But you're right; they are trained in and vigilant in the practice of trying to keep people alive. And it was tough. We started asking questions about whether keeping my father alive was appropriate long before the doctors were prepared to say, that's the right question, and maybe it isn't. And to be perfectly honest, actually no doctor charged with my father's care ever actually said that. Two doctors who were very good friends of his came to his bedside, and when we asked, said, if I love him too, and if the choice were mine, no, I would terminate care. I would move to hospice. And it was so the right decision. And I wish we'd made it about a week earlier than we did, which isn't that much time in the scheme of things, but it was the right call. And I do think it contributed. I wish endpoints didn't matter. When I talk to other people who are grieving, one of the things that just always breaks my heart is when people have a very difficult kind of final days, hours, minutes. It shouldn't matter, especially in the case when what precedes it is a wonderful and loving connection and a long life. But endings do matter, and when we think about them, and when they're hard, they're very difficult to make your peace with. And I'm so grateful that my father's ending was, on all the visible evidence at least, a very peaceful one, and about as good of one as you could have. And that's a communal peace, right? I think the peace of the dying is part of the peace of the living and the survivors and the family members. So I'm boundlessly grateful to it and to the hospice workers who made it happen.
First of all, thank you so much for your kind words and for sharing that. I think it's powerful and meaningful. I want to say, just your portrayal of grief and the way you speak about it, I've never seen it spoken in any more beautiful way than the way you spoke about it. I want to quote you just for a second, if that's okay, and then just have you sort of comment on it, because I mean, again, it as much as I've been doing this work for as long as I've been doing it, I learned so much from you and from the way in which you spoke about it. So please bear with me just for a second to quote you. I'm not sure how often people do that, but nonetheless, you talk about grief having no boundaries, right? That grief of any kind will age you, partly from exhaustion, but chiefly from confrontation with mortality. And of course, grief over a parent will age you because it pitches you forward an entire life stage, which is so true and so incredibly articulated. And what you said about mourning your dad in particular was acclimating to a new family geometry, right? From the square that the four of you and your mom and sister were, to the triangle, now you, your mom, and your sister, which is differently balanced, as you talked about, and requires a whole new understanding. You talk about, of course, the different stages that Kubler-Ross made famous, and now we understand that there's so much more. She's only touched the outside line of all of the different stages, and the stages are, that in addition to what she put forth, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, what you put forth, shock, pain, guilt, reflection, reconstruction, hope, and where does sadness fit in, right? Where does sadness fit in, as you pose? And you talk about how grief is seductive because it gives us an ongoing emotionally potent connection to the dead. And you say, which I just, it moves me so deeply. You say, I lost my father, but my father lost everything. Say a word about that. That is so important when we talk about being bereaved. We talk about grief, right? I lost my father. My father lost everything.
Yeah, that's a moment. It's one of the very few moments in the book that shows up in the original essay as well, because it was so obvious. I mean, I think kind of every revelation that we have as adults is always obvious, right? What gives it its force is kind of retroactively, you're like, well, yeah, duh, right? Like, and it's so it's so self-evident, but it is the case that after my dad died, quite soon after, I was really just kind of deep in the early days of grief, and my partner, I couldn't do anything. I was totally useless. I love my job. I'm grateful every day, as I said, and I am mindful. It's pretty much the cushiest job on the planet, right? I don't have to go anywhere. I lie around and read about things that are interesting to me, or call up people on the phone who are interesting to me. Occasionally I get to travel and do it. It's not an easy job to have in the immediate aftermath of grief, because it's entirely self-directed and it's entirely in your head. And I was really just adrift. I couldn't do the kind of thinking I needed to do for work. I couldn't, frankly, do very much of anything. And I, for the first time in my life, had sort of no tolerance at all for reading. Like, I just couldn't settle down with a book at all. But I could settle down with, and I could settle down to poetry. It was what I needed in those moments. It was incredibly soothing. And so one evening, my partner was reading Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, the just staggeringly perfect Walt Whitman poem. And there's Whitman kind of summoning the past and the present and the future, and just this crowd of human beings all kind of having the same experience of being on the water in New York Harbor, and looking at each other and looking at the seagulls and looking at the city. And in this totally staggering way, I just thought, that's what my father lost, right? He lost being the person on the boat looking at everything else. I'm here. I'm here. It hurts right now, but I'm here. I'm grieving my father because I am alive, and I have my mind, and I have my world, and I have Walt Whitman, and I have my partner reading me Walt Whitman, and my cat at my feet. And just the kind of scale of ultimate loss really hit me, right? And then kind of hit me again, because my father was one of these people on whom the joys of life were never lost, to his great credit, and to the great good fortune of everyone around him, starting with my mom and my sister and me. my dad just relished life. He just truly savored it. And it was horrifying, the kind of realization of, wait, I think I'm the one who lost something here.
Right.
Like, I'm not the one who lost something here. I mean, I lost something, right? But
Right.
as I said, my father lost everything.
Right. Well, I mean, you say so again, so well that when a loved one dies, right, there's a litany of things that they did not live long enough to do, right? Attend graduation, dance at your wedding, see the house you bought. I mean, it does, as you say, exactly, right? It spins us around to face backward, because memories are what we hold on to. In Jewish tradition, one of the things that we're encouraged to do is to remember loved ones and to speak their name as often as possible. And in the rabbinic literature, in the Talmud, it says that every time you remember someone and you say their name, or write their name, or something that they know that they're being remembered and that their lips move gently in the grave. And again, it's not that they're actually moving in the grave, but this idea that we connect the generations one to another and we bring these memories forward into the world with us by continuing to talk about them. And I encourage, when I'm with families as well, not to allow yourself, because it's too painful not to talk, but to allow yourself to grieve and to mourn, but then tell the stories, continue to tell them, because they're so special and meaningful. I really appreciated everything you talked about when it came to your father, sharing your experience and the grief, and how you still have his wallet in your top dresser drawer, which I think is beautiful. Let's transition a little bit now to love, because it's great to lose, but it's great to find, and it is lost and found. And you talk about finding takes two forms: recovery and discovery. Right? Recovery is finding something we previously lost, reversing that impact of loss. And of course, discovery is finding something that is new. And of course, in talking about your wife, and I guess call her C in the book, that was something very special. And you talk about finding love is often when we least expect it. That when we're looking for it, we don't find it. But when we sort of step back and allow ourselves sort of that space, the best possible things come into our life. And that sounds like is absolutely true about your wife. If you want to reflect on that a little bit, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, finding anything is kind of an interesting problem, right? And it turns out a lot of human brain power has gone into solving that problem. And that's true whether you're looking for something incredibly specific, dinosaur bones, or a U-boat that vanishes under the ocean in the Second World War, or as I said, a kind of medical cure. Discovery is a long and difficult and really, really interesting process. And it was a lot of fun to read about it. It's true for missing persons, right? There's a really interesting body of literature about how it is. My favorite book possibly that I read in the whole course of researching this book, I read this amazing book called Lost Person Behavior, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is about how people behave when they get lost. It's really fabulous. It's, it's obviously very alarming and sad in a certain sense, but it's utterly gripping. It's a technical manual for people who search for lost persons. And so it breaks down the behavior by, well, what does a toddler do when they get lost? What does a teenager do when they get lost? What does a woman alone do? What does a group of men do? What does someone with Alzheimer's do? And there are patterns, there's predictable behavior, and it can help you find people. Anyway, it's completely fascinating, but that's all just by way of saying it's always finding anything is kind of a technical challenge. Finding love is a really particular kind of challenge, which was fun to write about in the book. Although it's less fun to experience, as I knew for a long time, and as some of you possibly know too. It's really, really hard to look for something when you don't really have any idea where it is, or frankly, even what it's like. At least when you lose your laptop, you know that what you're looking for is your laptop. And in fact, there's probably a fairly defined space in which it vanished, or a series of possible spaces. When what you are looking for is the love of your life, right? I mean, what are you supposed to do?
Right.
It's like there's a lot of brain power dedicated to this problem, and a certain number of technologies dedicated to it. And in the end, it is still a very, very hard problem. And that problem bested me for a long time. It took me a long time to fall in love. And then, of course, when it happens, right? it feels, or felt to me, I should say, I think there's a lot of ways to fall in love, all of them beautiful. But in my case, love came to me, as certain discoveries do, by utter serendipity. It's less than finding it. It kind of felt like it found me. I went to lunch with a stranger one day. It was not a setup. There was no anticipation from either of us that this would be the first day of the rest of our lives, as they say, but in fact it was. And of course it was dazzling. It was incredible. And it's, one of the things I try to tell people who are still looking for love, in case anyone listening is in that category or newly looking for it, it's really incredible, but being in love and not being in love are two just stunningly different states of being. But actually, you can go from one to the other in one day. And that's an incredible thing, right? That's a really fascinating thing about our species, and a really delightful and amazing thing. So, yeah, I can't say enough in praise of finding love. It's pretty delightful.
It's funny because, as you talk about in the book, it's not necessarily the way it works in the books or the movies in particular, right? That we have to narrow the search area, right? Impose upon the giant pool of possibilities, restrictions, geography, physiology, right? Taste in, what you like. And it's funny because I remember when I started doing weddings as a rabbi many, many years ago, a couple came in and they said, I always ask them, well, how did you meet? I love those stories. I love stories in general, but I love stories of how people met. And so they said, Rabbi, don't tell anybody, but we met online. We met on JDate, and it was like a source of embarrassment. And they really just it's like I could not tell anybody the story of how they met. I had to pass over that completely. Now, 90% of the weddings that I perform, they met online. They met on. And I think it's gone from this source of embarrassment to kind of a badge of courage. And listen, whatever it takes, there's no right way or wrong way. It's a big world, and to find love, however we find love, should not be a source of embarrassment. So I think of these websites now, and I'm doing a wedding tomorrow night after Shabbat, and I was reviewing my talk today, and they met on Hinge, and that's just that's how it goes. So it's also interesting because you talk about how the idea of sort of couples traveling together, sort of this journey that they take. And in Jewish tradition, we believe that souls that traveled together in previous worlds find themselves again in this world, and will find themselves in the world to come. And again, not everybody necessarily believes that, but I think it's a powerful teaching, that souls sort of are kind of meant to be together, and we don't always understand what brings them together, but nonetheless, that souls travel together. I think it's powerful. I know I'm supposed to ask for questions. I have so many more, and I'm happy to defer to the crowd. So if people want to send comments in, I will. If there's questions, I'm happy to ask Kathryn those questions. But until we get those, I'm going to just sort of keep going. You talk about falling in love as a state of yearning for information. And I think say a little bit more about that, this idea of yearning for information. And that also you say, which I think is so true, is that what brings us together are similarities, and what keeps us together are differences. I love that. Can you speak a little bit to that, Kathryn?
Yeah, I would be really happy to, actually, because it does feel to me like one of the great gifts of my marriage. Yes, I do think I described that trajectory a little bit in the book, because I think it's true that in the beginning, we really, and all along, we cherish similarities, and especially in those early days, I think they feel talismanic. They feel when you find something you have in common with someone you've just met and are really excited about, they somehow feel like just this little gleaming scrap of evidence that it's meant to be, right? That they're exactly the right person for you. My partner and I both, love country music. We both hate baby corn. These are incredibly irrelevant details to a long and happy life, right? In a certain sense. And yet in another sense, details like that, whatever your version of them may be, of course they matter, right? They're the kinds of things you bond over, or they feel special, or they feel like they make something in your life just a little bit easier. You like the same kind of food, or you like to travel the same way, or whatever. And actually those kinds of seemingly small things can really matter, because life, as it turns out, is made up of a huge number of small things. But I do think that the difference is beautiful and is absolutely essential to relationships. In my own case, I fell in love with someone who, in certain ways, is quite self-evidently different from me. I am an extraordinarily skeptical Jew. My partner is a devout Lutheran and an extraordinarily well-studied one. She studied theology at Oxford and at Yale. Thought very seriously about joining the ministry. Is theologically very seriously minded. And as I said, I am, at best kind of dubious and interested, and sometimes a little bit sardonic on these subjects. My partner and I come from very different class backgrounds. You began by saying I'm from Shaker Heights, Ohio. I grew up squarely upper middle class, with all of the ease and expectation and advantages and outlooks that come with that, all of which I'm very grateful for in countless ways. And my father worked incredibly hard to give his daughters the life he did not have in his own childhood. My partner is from a very working class background in a very rural area. Neither of her parents went to college. In point of fact, essentially nobody in her entire community went to college. And she sort of, by sheer force of will and intellect, got herself to, as I said, Harvard, Oxford, and Yale. And like my father, has a really towering intellect, but in all these kinds of obvious ways of kind of class and religion, these things that have so much salience in our culture, we're quite different. As it turns out, we're different in some subtler ways too. We approach conflict differently, I guess I would say, both within and outside of our marriage. And that was really illuminating for me. And I had a ton of fun writing about it on the page, because at some point what I realized is it actually doesn't matter how similar you and your partner might seem to be. You could actually be a extraordinarily tall Jewish doctor who grew up in Zanzibar and has 15 siblings, who finds and marries an extraordinarily tall Jewish doctor who grew up in Zanzibar and has 12 siblings. And I have news for you, you're still going to be wildly different, right? Like it turns out that human beings are real one-offs, each and every one of us. And yes, there are ways that a shared cultural background can make certain kinds of things easy, but ultimately you and your partner are different. And you, especially in moments of high intensity, of intense conflict or intense transition, you will have different wants and different needs, and you will experience it differently. And there will be some friction and confrontation around that. And that's beautiful and it's wonderful. And I guess how I feel about difference is sameness is comfortable and comforting and joyful. But it is actually the ways that my partner is different from me that feel like the gift, right? I mean, partly just because they kind of doubled my world. I mean, you meet someone and you get to have their world too. And the more different their world is from yours, the bigger your own world gets in response. And partly because it's like wonderful to learn how someone else's mind works and what they read and what they think about and how they do react to conflict and why they think the things they do. So yes, I'm a huge champion of difference, because you really have to be if you want to just love someone and stay married to them for the rest of your life, which I very much want to do.
I'm so glad you brought up, first of all, thank you for that. I'm so glad that you brought up the conflict piece, because I do a lot of counseling with the couples that I officiate their weddings, because I find it's important that I counsel them and spend time with them. And a large part of what we talk about actually is conflict and how do you disagree with one another. And you just characterized it so beautifully in the book. You said that some retreat into themselves. They tend to their wounds while thinking a way through and eventually out of their anger, their hurt, their fear. And others rush toward it as a peacemaker, right? Not wanting to bear the feeling that something is wrong between each other and immediately fix it. And I find it's I don't know, it's really fascinating with all the couples that I've had the honor of counseling throughout the years, is almost to a couple, not every, but almost to a couple. One is immediately let's engage and let's fix this and let's not carry this through. And the other is I need some time, I need to think, I need to go back to my corner and figure it out. And then ultimately we almost never, and again, maybe it's just my limited experience, but almost never do I find that people have the same style when it comes to conflict. It's almost always the opposite. And I wonder, like all the time, are people sort of drawn to that as something sort of that's intuited early on in the relationship? And I also say to people, even if you can finish each other's sentences, even if you've been married 30, 40, 50 years, you can't read each other's minds. And it's always okay to ask them what they need in that moment. And if we did more of asking them what they need in that moment, I think we would be able to celebrate that difference in a more profound way. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's right. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about how couples tend to diverge along these lines of emotional need. I will say that of all the parts of my book, there's a couple of sections that I hear about more than any other, and one of those sections is this. I essentially I narrate a really spectacularly stupid fight that my wife and I once had. It was literally about whether you are more likely to see a black bear when you are out hiking for the day or whether you are on a backpacking trip. I could not, if I had spent like 7 weeks while writing this book trying to come up with the dumbest idea for a fight, I would not have come up with something so dumb. But that's a fight we actually had, and I kind of narrate my way through it quite slowly to get at this difference in how we approach those conflicts. And as much as almost any other scene in the book, with the exception of a couple of love scenes and 2 grief scenes, that's what I hear about. And so I think you're right. I think that I hear about it because people are like, oh my God, that's me and that's my partner and this is how we deal with things. And it's so funny. And what do we do? So yeah, I think that as I said, I mean, the beauty of people is we're not like each other, it's not just partners, right? Like I'm incredibly close to my mother and sister. My sister and I, in many ways on the surface, are very, very similar. And in many ways in our depths are very different. And that's despite growing up in the same household and growing up very close and remaining very close. So it's just like stubborn and wonderful fact of human existence that we each have our own mind and our own ways of being. And the more that we can decide to aim for cherishing it, but at a minimum recognize it, and to your point, say like, okay, but what's actually going on for you right now? And like, what do you need? And like, what can we do here?
Yeah. And I think growing up, because I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm the oldest of 3. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and I have 3 of our own, and everybody grows up in the same environment, but is so different. I think that's sort of like part of the brilliance of survival, of how you have to differentiate yourself. And in some way, although we love so many of the same things, there's that difference that makes us the unique people that we are. Mm-hmm. So we are running out of time, and which is unfortunate because I could go on for a long time with all the notes that I took and the things I wanted to ask you. But of course, I want to just say a word about the and, because as you said at the very, very beginning, sort of that connector. It's not either or, but it's the and that really binds us together, and the idea of lost and found. And I love how you ended your book. Would you be okay if I read it?
Yeah, by all means.
Unless you have it there and you would want to read it. I just think it's such a profound ending to this absolutely, really, truly inspiring piece that you wrote and that you shared with the world.
I absolutely endorse you reading it. I'm going to do one quick thing before you do that in case we run out of time. I don't know if we're going to get automatically cut off. I just want to say, slightly apropos of and, because I think the deepest kinds of connections and ands among us are always all of our family. I think it's slightly possible that some cousins of mine, Janet and Abe Berman, are in the audience there tonight in our virtual audience. And I just want to express my gratitude and love to my extended family as well, who fall outside the bounds of this book, but not at all outside the bounds of my heart, and certainly knew my father longer and probably in some ways better than I did, and know Detroit and know the way he grew up. And it means the world to me that they're there. I wish I were there with you. And I just, I wanted to say hello before the afternoon gets away from us. And now I will, by all means, you should read it instead of me. It's always interesting to hear other people read our work out loud.
Well, that's really kind of you. First of all, Abe is there. He just wrote, "Thank you
Oh
for
yeah,
your
look at that.
insightful
Oh,
thoughts and
wonderful.
illumination of human nature." So,
All right. Well, next year, as Jews have said forever, next year in Detroit, I hope to get to see you guys sometime soon.
you should definitely come to Detroit. You should have come yesterday. It was 73 degrees.
Oh yeah, perfect.
So I do want to thank you. I do want to just end this last piece with your words. Because again, there's so many different pieces I could read, but I really want to end our conversation with this. And Kathryn, I just also want to thank you just for engaging in this really wonderful conversation. And I really enjoyed it. And I want to thank all the people that have come to the book fair today and have partaken in being here with us. And I hope some of what you've heard has been inspiring. And if you have not yet read the book, do yourself a favor and read this book. You will not be sorry. So, Kathryn, this is how you end your book. This is what you say. You say, "Time will carry almost all of what we know of life away. It is not the strange or surprising, but the fundamental, unalterable nature of things. The astonishment is all in being here. It's the turtle in the pond, the thought in the mind, the falling star, the stranger on Main Street. No matter what goes missing, the object you need or the person you love, the lessons are always the same. Disappearance reminds us to notice, transience to cherish, fragility to defend. Loss is a kind of external conscience urging us to make better use of our finite days. Our crossing is a brief one, best spent bearing witness to all that we see, honoring what we find noble, tending what we know needs our care, recognizing that we are inseparably connected to all of it, including what is not yet upon us, including what is already gone. We are here to keep watch, not to keep." Kathryn, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Kathryn and Rabbi Krakoff, for being with us in such a rich and meaningful conversation. And thank you to all of you at home for joining us today. And please tell your friends that they can see this discussion on the JCC YouTube channel if they missed it today. Our next event is Saturday, November 12th at 7:30 p.m. with a live on-screen conversation with Mark Eden Horowitz, speaking about his book, The Letters of Oscar Hammerstein II, with cantor Neil Michaels. They will be followed by a live in-person performance of Rodgers and Hammerstein's favorites, performed by Broadway veterans Josh Young and Emily Paget. Remember to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and visit our website, jccdet.org/bookfair, for the rest of our full schedule and ways to get involved. Shabbat Shalom.